together again. It's good to see you again. I'm really excited to start talking about this whole thing of promise and covenant and what this looks like in our lives. I'm just going to start out. I feel like I'm supposed to start out by reading to you some of my journaling notes from the time when I really sat and started pondering Mary and this, what the Lord, what I kept hearing him talk about her being a woman of his presence. And I really got in this place of thinking about her life. And at one point I thought that this whole thing was going to be some sort of a book. It's so funny, we tend to have this way of going to the paradigms that we're used to or what's comfortable or what we see other people doing. And I just think, again, God is far too creative for things to be a formula or the same. And so I love that he's doing something completely different with all of this. So I'm just going to read kind of some of my thoughts, and then we'll talk a little bit about promise and covenant and the things that fascinated me as I studied and the things that I was learning. So, why Mary? Well, the answer's simple. Though it sounds like the title to a less than glowing secular movie, there's something about Mary. As the mother of the Messiah, she's revered above all other women in the Bible. She's even worshipped by some. There's no argument that her role was crucial to God's plans for the redemption of humanity. Because of the controversy over worshiping her, I think there is a tendency to shy away from studying her life. From the human perspective, no one else in all of history has had the experience of living in the presence of the Lord in the same way that Mary did in the natural. As the Lord has drawn me into an intense curiosity about the entirety of her life, I pondered my perceptions of her uniqueness and found a deeper meaning of the relevance of her life for us as believers. And as I said last time, I'm aware that this on the outside may appeal more to women. It may have a greater appeal to women, but just because it's about a woman and I'm a woman that's sharing this, however, like all other characters in the Bible, there's revelation to be gained from her life for all of us. So anyway, I kept thinking about echo. I kept hearing life in an echo. And so that's like this little note in my journal. And under that, I started to write, his voice has been silent now since the prophet Malachi. Is it really possible that it has been 430 years? She, being Mary, she has grown up hearing all the stories, though, just as the 4 to 5 generations before her since he stopped speaking. What would she have heard? Does she ask to hear them over and over, relishing the details, or is she bored of hearing the same old thing and never experiencing him for herself? Have world events changed the focus of what people talked about or their understanding of who he is? Has he become vague or distorted in their minds? The word reverberate keeps coming to mind as I think about this time of God's silence between the Old Testament prophets and the angel Gabriel. The dictionary, of course I had to go to the dictionary because that's what I do. The dictionary defines reverberate as to re-echo or resound, to be reflected many times. So I find this interesting. It's not just an echo, it's a re-echo. It's been reflected many times. So for multiple generations, the stories have been told. Mary has grown up hearing all the stories. Just as the 4 to 5 generations before her since he stopped speaking. She heard these stories from her parents, who heard them from their parents, who heard them from their parents, and so it has been generation after generation. What would she have heard? Does she ask to hear them over and over? Is it something she enjoys and relishes? the other thing that I sat and really thought about was, what were his last words? When you think of someone's final words, in the moment, you rarely realize they're being spoken. And this actually, what comes to mind right now is, we just, as the world, just experienced Whitney Houston's death. And I noted something, even though I've kind of been somewhat unplugged for the last few days, I did see that the last song that she sang was Jesus Loves Me. And, we weren't aware. None of us were aware that that was going to be her last song. Was she aware that that was going to be her last song? So when you think, about that in the moment, you rarely realize that it's the person's last words, last spoken words. Once you become aware that they've ceased speaking, you begin to focus on them. You begin to focus on their final words, especially when you know that every word they've ever spoken was intentional and purposeful, as it is with God. So what did he say? And what did he mean? And what's happened since he spoke? How has the meaning of his words evolved as the world has moved on in silence? As a young woman, what might she have heard? Use your imagination here. Women weren't taught in the same way that men were. So what might she have heard? There were customs on what young women would have been exposed to. Does she hear people who feel forgotten in their circumstances? Does she hear people who feel desperate in their oppression? Does she hear people who are discouraged and tired of clinging to unfulfilled promises? Does she hear people who are hopeful and remember their heritage of a God who shows up for them? Does she hear people who remember the promises? Do they remember that he was silent for 430 years before, when their people were slaves in Egypt? And then he broke his silence and sent a deliverer, Moses. Have they made a connection that creates expectancy, or are they detached and unaware, remembering only an echo? So those were some of the thoughts as I began my season into this whole thing about presence. What is this? What is God saying about presence? And last time we spoke about the fact that Jesus says that the kingdom of God is at hand. It's near. It's here. We are in it. It's our awareness. If we don't have eyes to see or ears to hear, we miss it. We miss out on God's presence all around us. So these are just some of my thoughts as I pondered and the things that I heard him saying as I moved into what I'll call a season of understanding what it means to live in his presence, not enter his presence. Mary didn't enter his presence. His presence consumed her. When she said yes, he moved in and she was consumed by his presence. And that's what this life of living in his presence is about. It's about being utterly consumed from the inside until it manifests outwardly, like all the things. He just comes in and takes over in a great, amazing way. So the thing that I think really struck me about promises and covenant, and I'm going to speak a whole lot more on this a little bit further in our journey, when we think of in our culture, in our day, promises those are flippant almost. Even covenants or contracts, what we call a contract, are flippant. The thing that I love about how the Lord operates is he's the one that confirms his own covenant. He does it on his name and on his character and on his nature. So they're firm, they're solid. He's responsible for fulfilling his own covenant with people. So I hope you've enjoyed learning about the promises that God has made to humanity, because that's one piece of this, is there are promises that are for all of us. There are covenant promises that he's made to peoples, to Israel. I mean, you can read about those, to Abraham, the promises and things that he made. But one of the things that I found unique about this is that then, separate from his promises to everyone, was a specific promise that he made to Mary. So we all have individual promises as well, and those individual promises are tied to our unique destiny, our unique role at this time, at this place in history, in the world, where you're planted, where you were a thought in the mind of God, and he created you for a specific destiny. And so the promises that he gives to you have to do with your destiny. So I think about, for Mary, when she receives this promise, what it meant to her. It's so funny. I know there are so many times when, I'm in the presence of the Lord and he's speaking these things, and he's, it's so easy to say yes to him when you're in the presence, right? When you're so aware of him around you, you're overcome by his love and his goodness, and you don't have any fear. I mean, it's just so easy to say yes. And your heart means it. Again, he takes us at our heart. He takes us at our heart. So our heart means yes. But then afterwards you start to go, what in the world was I thinking when I asked for that, or I said that, or I committed myself to that? And so I wonder what that was like for Mary after saying yes. I mean, I can only imagine afterwards she's like, ooh, wait a minute, what is this going to mean? What is this going to mean? In her society, in her culture in that day, you were stoned. A woman could be stoned, and virginity was highly valued, and she was betrothed, so this was seen as adultery, because the covenant in that culture began at betrothal. So this was seen as adultery, and so all those things that, I can imagine she might just be sitting. I know I've done this. It's like, what in the world did I just say? What did I just commit myself to? And so I think about that. Here's the angel of the Lord, and you're in this amazing atmosphere of God's presence, and it's there's no fear there. You're just overcome with awe, and you say yes. So what questions did she have later? And then there becomes the whole question for me a lot of times is, okay, well, did I even hear that right? Did I just think that in my head? Was that my imagination? And so the Lord, like even with Mary, he sends confirmations. He confirms it through Elizabeth. She goes to see Elizabeth, and Elizabeth confirms that Mary heard from the Lord. I mean, she's not even showing, and Mary didn't tell Elizabeth that she's pregnant. She probably didn't even know when she got there. So Elizabeth provides a confirmation, and the Lord, in his loving kindness, lets Joseph know, so that Joseph isn't fearful of the situation and doesn't reject or abandon Mary. I'm sure those thoughts were going through her mind. Oh my gosh, I might be out on the streets. I could, whatever. Was she fearful about that, or did she have enough faith in the promise to know that if the Lord has promised this to me, nothing can happen to me because the promise isn't here yet? So you can take two stands. Are you going to be in fear or doubt of all the things that could come against that promise? Or, you know what, the promise isn't here yet, so nothing can harm me because God promised me. So how do you contend? How did she contend? How did she stand in that promise? And the Lord in his faithfulness confirms with Joseph, that he has given this promise to Mary, and he's going to be the one to fulfill it. One of the things that really, that the Lord has really spoken to me, he's given me some promises, just as I'm sure he's given you some promises. And there was a long season in my life where I really believed those promises required a certain situation or a certain circumstance to look a certain way in my life, and it required cooperation of other people. And the Lord really used this for me, because he asked me one day, he said, Tricia, was my promise to Mary contingent on Joseph? And I mean, I had to sit and think about it, but really, no, it wasn't. No matter what, whether Joseph chose to go ahead and marry Mary, or to divorce her and not to marry her, she was already pregnant. Mary was already pregnant. So God's promise was going to be fulfilled. Your promises from God are never contingent on someone else. He doesn't work that way. His promises to you, he will fulfill them. So it's a process. For me, it was a process of letting go and releasing all those other things that I felt were connected to the promise he'd given me, and just stand on that promise alone, and just saying, you know what, I don't know what this is going to look like. I thought it was going to look like this. This doesn't seem to be what's happening. I don't really understand what you're doing, but I know you've given me this promise because you've confirmed it so many times in so many ways that I could not have made up. And even though I don't fully understand it, I don't see it yet. So I want to encourage you in the way that you stand and contend for the promises that you feel like the Lord has deposited into your heart about your unique role and your unique destiny in his plans. Don't walk in fear in those. You can look at them from a place of absolute standing in faith. I don't see it yet, so things that seem to be coming against that, you can just, that's not true because this is true. This is what God promised, so it doesn't really matter what that looks like. This hasn't happened yet, so you can just release those things and not let that create fear in you. Okay, so I think my mind went blank, so that tells me I'm done. I don't think I have anything more to say about that or to share with you in this for this session today, but I'm making a note of where we're going. So the next thing that we're going to talk about, and again, men, this is going to hang with me on this because this is going to stretch you and challenge you. This part of the journey is going to be easy, I think, for women. Because the thing that we're going to study next is about pregnancy and being pregnant. And so I encourage you to, really there's great books out there. There's online, you can go what to expect when you can go check out what to expect when you're expecting. I think that's what it's called, what to expect when you're expecting. Lots of good resources that show you about the growth and development of the baby when you're pregnant, what is happening for you as a mother. And I want to stress this. This is really interesting because when there is a place in the New Testament when Jesus's mother and brothers are coming to look for him, and they come to Jesus and they say, hey, your mother and your brothers are outside and they're looking for you. And Jesus says, well, who are my mother and my brothers and my sisters? Who you are? Those who follow me are my mother and my brother. So those who are following are his mother. We and that's, I think I've explained that. We are, one of our roles as a follower is that of a mother, because we receive the promise when we say yes, and we let that grow inside of us, and we birth him. And of course, we walk with him as a sibling, as a child of God. We walk as a sibling with him as well. So there's, we have multiple roles in this walk, which in this journey with the Lord. So I really want you to dig into pregnancy. What happens when you're pregnant? What changes are you going to experience? So have fun with that. Again, probably easier for women to grasp this than men, but I encourage men to go study it because I think the Lord really will speak in profound ways through the whole, this whole journey of being pregnant. Okay, so I've enjoyed our time. Thank you again for the honor of getting to journey with you. It's an absolute blessing to just be able to share the Lord with you. And so I hope you're enjoying your journey, and we will meet again on the other side of this whole journey into being pregnant.